Show us how humans really breed. The demand echoed through the Aridian High Council chambers, a mixture of curiosity and desperation in the alien voices. Ambassador Primus stood before the assembly, his iridescent skin shimmering with tension as he received his covert mission. The Aridian civilization, once proud and expansive, now faced a crisis. Their population growth had stagnated, while humans seemed to multiply at an alarming rate, threatening to outpace Aridian expansion across the galaxy. The High Council, a group of elongated, silvery beings with compound eyes, convened this emergency session to address the issue. Ambassador Primus, the High Counselor's voice reverberated, you are tasked with uncovering the secrets of human reproduction. Travel to Earth under the guise of a cultural exchange. Learn their methods, study their biology, and bring back the knowledge that could save our species. Primus nodded, his antenna twitching with a mix of excitement and apprehension. He understood the gravity of his mission. The future of the Aridian race depended on his success. Weeks later, Primus found himself on Earth, face to face with Daniel Gordon, a human biologist specializing in reproductive sciences. The Aridian's compound eyes took in every detail of the human's appearance, noting the stark differences between their species. Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Primus, Daniel said, extending a hand. I'm looking forward to our comparative study of Aridian and human biology. Primus grasped Daniel's hand, marveling at the warmth and efficiency of the human body. If only Daniel knew the true nature of his visit, to unlock the secrets of human fertility and potentially save the Aridian race from extinction. As they began their research, Primus found himself both fascinated and disturbed by the human reproductive process. The frequency and efficiency of human breeding were beyond anything he had imagined. He struggled to comprehend how a species could reproduce so rapidly without exhausting their resources. Daniel, meanwhile, grew increasingly suspicious of Primus's intense interest in human mating habits and reproductive cycles. The Aridian's questions became more probing, his request for data more specific. Something didn't add up. Unbeknownst to Daniel, Primus faced another complication. A group of female Aridians, known as the Fertility Seekers, had secretly contacted him. Their message was clear: acquire human DNA samples for unauthorized breeding experiments. Primus found himself torn between his duty to the High Council and the allure of potentially saving his species through more direct means. One evening, as Primus communicated with the High Council using a hidden device in his quarters, Daniel walked in unannounced. The human's eyes widened as he saw the alien technology, realization dawning on his face. "What's going on, Primus?" Daniel demanded, his voice tight with betrayal. "What's the real reason you're here?" The confrontation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of a human military unit, their boots echoing in the hallway. Someone had alerted them to potential alien espionage. As tension filled the air, Primus realized he had to make a choice: complete his mission at any cost, or protect the budding friendship with Daniel and seek a peaceful resolution. The fate of two species hung in the balance as Primus opened his mouth to speak, hoping to explain the Aridians' dire situation and find a solution that could benefit both races without compromising Earth's security or human autonomy. The true nature of human breeding had brought them to this point. Now it might be the key to forging an unprecedented alliance or igniting an interstellar conflict. "The Aridian population faces extinction," Primus blurted out, his compound eyes fixed on Daniel's shocked expression. The human military unit's footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. Daniel's mind raced, processing the gravity of Primus's confession. He glanced at the door, half expecting Major Hawkins to burst back in. When he didn't, Daniel let out a long breath and turned back to the alien ambassador. "Explain," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Primus's antennae drooped as he recounted the dire situation facing his species. "Our birth rates have plummeted, and genetic degradation is accelerating. We're on the brink of collapse." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his earlier sense of betrayal giving way to empathy. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Fear," Primus admitted. "Fear of your reaction, of jeopardizing our mission. But now—" Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. "We'll find a solution," he said, surprising himself with his drive. "One that doesn't compromise Earth's security." The next day, Daniel introduced Primus to Dr. Alara Vex, an Arcturian xenobiologist he'd collaborated with on previous projects. Her silvery skin and four-fingered hands marked her as distinctly non-human, but her eyes held a warmth that immediately put Primus at ease. "Ambassador," she greeted him, her voice melodious, "Daniel has filled me in on your situation. I believe my expertise in interspecies genetics might be of use." They established a makeshift laboratory in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Equipment hummed softly as they worked, analyzing genetic structures and reproductive cycles. Days blurred into weeks as they delved deeper into the intricacies of Aridian and human biology. One evening, as Daniel peered into a microscope, he let out a gasp. "Primus, Dr. Vex, you need to see this." They crowded around the display screen, watching in awe as human and Aridian DNA strands intertwined on a molecular level. "Remarkable compatibility," Dr. Vex murmured, her fingers flying over a datapad, with only a few key differences preventing successful interbreeding. The implications of their discovery hung heavy in the air. Daniel was the first to break the silence. "We need to approach this cautiously. Focus on treatments to boost Aridian fertility." Primus's antennae twitched with agitation. "That could take years. My people don't have that kind of time." "What about human Aridian hybrids?" Dr. Vex suggested, her eyes gleaming with scientific curiosity. Daniel opened his mouth to protest, but a sharp knock at the laboratory door cut him off. They froze, exchanging panicked glances. The door swung open, revealing a tall, elegant Aridian female. Her iridescent skin shimmered with an authority that made Primus instinctively straighten his posture. "Ambassador Lyra," he said, his voice tight. Lyra's compound eyes swept the laboratory, taking in the humans and the equipment. "I've been monitoring your progress, Primus. The High Council is dissatisfied with the lack of results." Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself between Lyra and their research. "We've made significant breakthroughs." Lyra held up a hand, silencing him. "You have 1 month," she declared. 1 month to produce a viable solution, or the High Council will consider more aggressive measures." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving the trio in stunned silence. "We need to accelerate our research," Primus said, already moving towards the gene sequencer. Dr. Vex nodded, her fingers flying over a control panel. "I propose we begin preliminary trials, combining human and Aridian genetic material in a controlled setting." Daniel hesitated, the ethical implications weighing heavily on him. But as he looked at Primus's desperate expression and thought of the millions of Aridians facing extinction, he made his decision. "Let's do it," he said. They worked tirelessly, pushing the boundaries of science and ethics. Daniel found himself drawn to Dr. Vex, their shared passion for discovery, fostering a deep connection. Late one night, as they pored over genetic sequencing data, their hands brushed. They paused, eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. Primus watched their growing closeness with a mixture of curiosity and unease. He respected his human colleagues, admired their dedication, but as the deadline loomed closer, the weight of his species' fate pressed down on him. He thought of the fertility seekers, wondering if their unauthorized experiments had yielded any results. On the eve of their deadline, alarms blared through the laboratory. Daniel rushed to the incubation chamber, his heart pounding. Dr. Vex and Primus crowded behind him as he peered through the viewing window. Inside, nestled in a nutrient-rich solution, a tiny embryo pulsed with life. Its DNA, a perfect blend of human and Aridian genes, represented the first successful hybrid. As the implications of their creation sank in, a heavy silence fell over the laboratory. They had done the impossible, but at what cost? The ethical quandaries and potential consequences of their actions loomed large, casting a shadow over their momentous achievement. Daniel turned to his companions, his expression a mix of awe and trepidation. "What have we done?" he whispered, as the embryo continued to grow, oblivious to the storm it had unleashed. The tiny embryo pulsed with life, its genetic makeup a perfect blend of human and Aridian DNA. Daniel stared at it, transfixed by the implications of their creation. He felt Dr. Vex's warmth beside him, her breath catching as she too realized the magnitude of their achievement. Primus's antennae twitched rapidly, a sign of his growing anxiety. "We've done it," he whispered, his compound eyes reflecting the soft blue glow of the incubation chamber. But at what cost? Daniel tore his gaze away from the embryo, his mind racing. "We need to keep this secret," he said, his voice low and urgent. "If Ambassador Lyra finds out—" "She'd take control of the research immediately," Dr. Vex finished, her silver skin shimmering with tension. "The High Council would demand we hand over everything." Primus nodded solemnly. "And we can't be certain they'd use this knowledge responsibly." The trio exchanged worried glances, the weight of their decisions settling heavily upon them. They had crossed a line, venturing into uncharted scientific and ethical territory. The fate of two species now rested in their hands. Days passed, and the team worked tirelessly to monitor the embryo's development. Daniel hunched over a computer terminal, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Suddenly, he sat up straight, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "This can't be right," he muttered, drawing the attention of Dr. Vex and Primus. Dr. Vex leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening as she scanned the data. "The growth rate, it's accelerating exponentially." Primus clicked his mandibles in concern. "How is that possible?" Daniel shook his head, bewildered. "I don't know, but we need to adapt our equipment fast. If this continues, our current setup won't be able to sustain it." They scrambled to modify their instruments, working around the clock to keep pace with the embryo's unexpected development. As they toiled, none of them noticed the subtle shimmer of an Aridian surveillance device hidden in the corner of the lab. Miles away, Ambassador Lyra sat in her temporary quarters, her compound eyes fixed on a holographic display. The images were grainy, the audio distorted, but what she saw filled her with a mixture of excitement and dread. "By the spiral arms," she breathed, misinterpreting the data before her. In her mind, the rapidly growing embryo transformed into a fully formed hybrid child. Without hesitation, she activated her secure communication link to the High Council. "Honored counselors," she began, her voice trembling with urgency. "The humans have succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. They've created a viable hybrid child without our knowledge or consent." The response was immediate. "Secure the hybrid and return to Aridia at once," the High Counselor commanded. "This development changes everything." As Lyra prepared to mobilize her forces, tension grew within the secret lab. Daniel and Dr. Vex found themselves drawn closer together, their shared passion for their work evolving into something more. Late one night, as they calibrated sensors to track the embryo's accelerated growth, their hands brushed. They paused, eyes meeting in the dim light of the lab. Dr. Vex's silver skin seemed to glow as she leaned in, her lips meeting Daniel's in a tender kiss. For a moment, the weight of their impossible task lifted, replaced by the warmth of newfound intimacy. Primus observed their growing closeness with a mixture of fascination and unease. He felt a pang of isolation, caught between his duty to his people and his loyalty to his human colleagues. As he watched Daniel and Dr. Vex work side by side, their movements in perfect sync, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd made the right choice in keeping secrets from Ambassador Lyra. The embryo continued to develop at an alarming rate, forcing the team to confront difficult questions. Daniel paced the lab, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "We need to consider terminating the experiment," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "The risks are becoming too great." Dr. Vex shook her head vehemently. "We can't give up now. We're on the brink of something revolutionary." Primus stood silently, torn between the two perspectives. The fate of his species hung in the balance, yet the potential dangers of their creation loomed large. Their debate was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Hearts racing, they exchanged panicked glances. Daniel moved to answer, his hand hovering over the control panel. The door slid open, revealing a woman with olive skin and piercing dark eyes. "Daniel," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and concern. "What in the world are you up to here?" Daniel's jaw dropped. "Dr. Khalil? How did you—" Dr. Zara Khalil stepped into the lab, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of Primus and the advanced equipment surrounding them. "I detected unusual energy signatures in the area," she explained, her gaze fixed on the incubation chamber. "But this is beyond anything I could have imagined." As Dr. Khalil absorbed the magnitude of their work, alarms blared from multiple monitoring stations. The embryo's growth had suddenly spiked, threatening to overwhelm their carefully calibrated systems. "We need your help," Daniel said urgently, guiding Dr. Khalil to a terminal. "Your expertise in genetics might be our only hope of stabilizing the embryo." Dr. Khalil nodded, her initial shock giving way to professional focus. She immersed herself in the data, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked to understand the complex interplay of human and Aridian DNA. Hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. With Dr. Khalil's insights, they managed to slow the embryo's growth to a more manageable rate. Just as they began to breathe a collective sigh of relief, Primus's antenna suddenly stood rigid. "We have incoming signals," he announced, his voice tight with alarm. "Multiple sources, approaching from different directions." Daniel rushed to the security feeds, his heart sinking as he recognized the figures on the screens. "It's Ambassador Lyra's forces," he said, pointing to one group. "And that's Major Hawkins and his team." The gravity of their situation hit them like a physical blow. They were trapped, their groundbreaking research on the verge of discovery, by forces that might not understand or appreciate its significance. As the gravity of their situation sank in, Primus's antennae began to twitch rapidly, a sign of intense thought. His compound eyes reflected the soft blue glow of the embryo's chamber as he turned to face his colleagues. "I have a proposition," he said, his voice quivering with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance." All eyes turned to the Aridian ambassador as he explained his bold plan. Using advanced Aridian technology, they could potentially accelerate the embryo's growth even further, bringing it to term within a matter of hours. "A fully developed hybrid," Dr. Vex breathed, her silver skin shimmering with anticipation. "It could change everything." Daniel's brow furrowed with concern. "The ethical implications alone—" "We don't have time for ethics," Dr. Khalil interrupted, her eyes fixed on the monitors displaying the approaching forces. "We need to act now if we want to preserve our work and potentially prevent an interspecies conflict." As the team debated the merits and risks of Primus's plan, the sounds of boots echoing in the hallway and the hum of Aridian energy weapons grew louder. Time was running out. Daniel looked at each of his colleagues in turn, seeing the perseverance in their eyes. With a deep breath, he nodded. "Let's do it." They sprang into action, fingers flying across control panels, and voices calling out readings as they implemented Primus's daring plan. The embryo's chamber hummed with energy, its glow intensifying as they pushed the limits of their technology and understanding. Outside, Ambassador Lyra's forces converged with Major Hawkins's team, creating a tense standoff. Neither group was willing to back down, each believing they had the right to claim what lay behind the laboratory doors. Inside, the air crackled with energy as the accelerated growth process reached its peak. Alarms blared, warning of system overloads and unstable energy readings. The team worked feverishly, making split-second adjustments to keep the process from spiraling out of control. As the chamber's glow reached blinding intensity, a new sound cut through the chaos, a sound that made them all freeze in astonishment. It was the cry of a newborn, but unlike any they had heard before. The wail carried the depth of a human infant and the resonance of an Aridian's first chirp. The hybrid child had been born. The team stood in stunned silence as the cry echoed through the lab, their eyes fixed on the chamber's pulsing glow. Daniel was the first to move, rushing to the control panel to initiate the opening sequence. As the chamber's protective shell retracted, they caught their first glimpse of the hybrid child. She was unlike anything they had ever seen, a perfect blend of human and Aridian features. Her skin shimmered with a faint iridescence, and her eyes, though human in shape, held the depth and complexity of Aridian compound eyes. "She's beautiful," Dr. Vex whispered, her silver skin reflecting the soft light emanating from the child. Dr. Khalil immediately set to work, running scans and checks on the newborn. Her vitals are strong, she reported, her voice tinged with awe. But the rate of cellular division, it's off the charts. As if to confirm her words, the child began to grow before their eyes. Within minutes, she had reached the size of a human toddler, her limbs elongating and her features becoming more defined. "We need to stabilize her growth," Daniel said urgently, his fingers flying across the control panel. "Primus, can you adjust the Aridian stasis field?" Primus nodded, his antennae twitching rapidly as he worked. "I'm modulating the quantum resonance. It should help slow the acceleration." As they worked to contain the hybrid's unprecedented growth, the sounds of conflict outside grew louder. The clash of human and Aridian voices echoed through the corridors, a stark reminder of the danger they faced. "We don't have much time," Dr. Vex said, glancing nervously at the sealed door. The child, now physically resembling a human adolescent, opened her eyes fully for the first time. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in each of her creators with an unsettling intelligence. "Hello," she said, her voice a melodious blend of human speech and Aridian harmonics. "I am Nova." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Nova? How did you—" "I chose it," Nova replied, sitting up and flexing her fingers experimentally. "It felt right. A new star born from the union of two worlds." Dr. Khalil approached cautiously, her scanner humming. "Your cognitive functions are extraordinary. Can you tell us how you feel?" Nova tilted her head, considering. "I feel complete, and yet unfinished. There is so much to learn, to understand." As Nova spoke, her body continued to mature, quickly reaching the appearance of a young adult. Her skin took on a more pronounced iridescent sheen, and delicate antenna-like structures emerged from her hairline. Primus watched in fascination, his compound eyes reflecting a mix of awe and concern. "She's a perfect blend," he murmured. "But what will this mean for our people? For humanity?" Before anyone could respond, a thunderous boom shook the lab. The sealed door buckled slightly, the metal groaning under immense pressure. "They're breaking through!" Dr. Vex exclaimed, her silver skin paling with fear. Daniel made a split-second decision. "We need to unseal the lab," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "If we don't, they'll force their way in. And who knows what could happen to Nova?" Nova stood, her movements fluid and graceful, despite her rapidly changing physiology. "I can help," she said, her voice carrying a confidence that belied her mere hours of existence. "I understand the conflict. I can feel it, the fear, the mistrust on both sides." Dr. Khalil nodded, a plan forming in her mind. Nova could be the key to preventing a catastrophe. If both sides see her, understand what she represents. "It's risky," Primus interjected, his antennae twitching with anxiety. "But I agree, it may be our only chance." As another impact shook the lab, Daniel moved to the door controls. "All right," he said, taking a deep breath. "We do this together. Nova, are you ready?" Nova straightened, her hybrid features settling into an expression of determination. "I am," she replied, her voice resonating with both human warmth and Aridian harmonics. Daniel's finger hovered over the release mechanism. Outside, the voices of Ambassador Lyra and Major Hawkins rose above the din, each demanding immediate entry. "Remember," Dr. Vex said softly to Nova, "you represent the best of both our species. You are the bridge we never knew we needed." With a nod from Nova, Daniel pressed the button. The lab doors began to slide open, revealing the tense standoff beyond. Human soldiers and Aridian guards stood with weapons raised, their faces a mix of suspicion and curiosity. As the opening widened, Nova stepped forward, her iridescent skin catching the light. She stood tall, a living embodiment of human and Aridian unity, facing the challenges that lay ahead. Ambassador Lyra and Major Hawkins, caught mid-argument, fell silent as they laid eyes on Nova. The hybrid child, now a young woman, gazed back at them, her expression serene, yet resolute. "Greetings," Nova said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I am Nova, child of two worlds, and I have much to discuss with you all." Nova's words hung in the air, their resonance captivating both human and Aridian forces. The tense atmosphere shifted as Ambassador Lyra and Major Hawkins lowered their weapons, their eyes fixed on the extraordinary being before them. Ambassador Lyra stepped forward, her translucent skin shimmering with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "This is unprecedented," she said, her voice a melodious trill. "How is this possible?" Major Hawkins, his weathered face etched with lines of suspicion, kept his hand near his sidearm. "We need answers, and we need them now," he demanded, his gaze shifting between Nova and the team of scientists behind her. Nova raised her hands in a placating gesture, her iridescent skin catching the light. "I understand your concerns," she said, her voice carrying both human warmth and Aridian harmonics. "I am the result of groundbreaking research conducted by these brilliant minds. My existence proves that our species can not only coexist, but thrive together." As Nova began to explain the intricacies of her creation, a commotion at the far end of the corridor caught everyone's attention. A new group pushed through the ranks of soldiers and Aridian guards, led by a striking woman with sharp features and piercing green eyes. "Dr. Elena Volkov," Daniel muttered, recognizing the renowned geneticist. "This can't be good." Dr. Volkov strode forward, her eyes locked on Nova. "Extraordinary," she breathed, reaching out as if to touch the hybrid. "You must come with me immediately. The potential applications of your genetic structure are limitless." Nova took a step back, her expression wary. "I'm not a specimen to be studied, Dr. Volkov. I'm a sentient being with rights and autonomy." Volkov's face hardened. "You don't understand. This is bigger than you or any individual. The advancements we could make in human medicine, in longevity—" "Enough," Major Hawkins interjected. "Nobody's taking anyone anywhere until we sort this out." The situation rapidly deteriorated as Dr. Volkov signaled to her security team. They moved forward, attempting to flank Nova and the scientists. Ambassador Lyra's guards responded, forming a protective barrier around the group. In the chaos that ensued, Nova's eyes began to glow with an otherworldly light. She raised her hands, and suddenly, a shimmering field of energy erupted around her. The force knocked back the advancing security team, sending them sprawling. "She's more powerful than we anticipated," Dr. Volkov shouted, her voice a mix of fear and excitement. "Subdue her, quickly!" As the security team regrouped, Nova demonstrated more unexpected abilities. She moved with inhuman speed, effortlessly evading their grasp. When one guard managed to grab her arm, Nova's skin emitted a brief pulse of energy, forcing him to let go. Amidst the confusion, Primus made a swift decision. His antennae twitched rapidly as he reached into a hidden pocket of his suit. "Nova," he called out, "prepare yourself." With a flick of his wrist, Primus activated a small, ornate device. A wave of energy pulsed outward, enveloping the entire room. Humans and Aridians alike froze in place, caught in a state of suspended animation. Only Nova, Daniel, and Dr. Vex remained unaffected, protected by their proximity to the hybrid. "What did you do?" Daniel asked, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Aridian technology," Primus explained hurriedly. "A localized stasis field. It won't last long. We need to get Nova out of here now." Dr. Vex nodded, her silver skin gleaming with tenacity. "The spaceport. We can use the prototype ship." Without hesitation, the group fled the lab, Nova leading the way with her enhanced speed and agility. They raced through the corridors, past the frozen forms of soldiers and scientists, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. As they burst out of the facility, the effects of the stasis field began to wear off. Shouts of alarm echoed behind them as their pursuers regained mobility. The spaceport loomed ahead, a sleek experimental craft sitting on the launch pad. Daniel's eyes lit up with recognition. "The XR-7?" he breathed. "I helped design its navigation systems." They sprinted across the tarmac, the sounds of pursuit growing louder. Nova reached the ship first, her hand hovering over the access panel. To everyone's surprise, the ship's systems responded to her touch, the entry ramp lowering smoothly. "How did you do that?" Dr. Vex asked as they clambered aboard. Nova's eyes flickered with data streams. I I'm not sure. It's as if the ship's systems and I speak the same language. Daniel slid into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. Let's hope that language includes fast takeoff, he muttered, initiating the launch sequence. The ship's engines roared to life just as their pursuers reached the launch pad. Ambassador Lyra, Major Hawkins, and Dr. Volkov watched in frustration as the XR-7 lifted off, quickly becoming a speck in the sky. As Earth fell away beneath them, Nova's gaze remained fixed on the monitor, her expression a mix of wonder and apprehension. "Where do we go now?" she asked softly. Daniel checked the navigation system, his brow furrowing in confusion. "That's odd. The ship seems to have locked onto a set of coordinates. It's taking us into uncharted space." Dr. Vex leaned forward, her silver skin reflecting the starlight. "Nova, can you interface with the ship's systems? See if you can determine the origin of these coordinates." Nova placed her hand on the console, closing her eyes in concentration. Suddenly, her body went rigid, her eyes flying open to reveal swirling galaxies within their depths. "Nova!" Daniel cried out in alarm. "What's happening?" When Nova spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I see a world. Ancient. Powerful. The key to everything we are. Everything we could be." As the vision faded, Nova slumped in her seat, exhausted but exhilarated. "We need to go there," she said with quiet certainty. "Whatever's waiting for us, it's important. It's why I exist." Daniel and Dr. Vex exchanged worried glances, but they knew there was no turning back now. As the XR-7 accelerated towards its mysterious destination, the trio settled in for a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves, their species, and the vast universe that awaited them. The XR-7 hurtled through the void of uncharted space, its occupants tense with anticipation. Nova's eyes remained fixed on the interface, her gaze intense and focused. Suddenly, the ship's proximity alarms blared to life. "We're approaching the coordinates," Daniel announced, his fingers dancing across the control panel. "But there's something else out there." Dr. Vex leaned forward, her silver skin reflecting the soft glow of the instrument panels. "An asteroid field," she observed, her voice tinged with concern. "Dense and unpredictable. Can we navigate it safely?" Before Daniel could respond, Nova placed her hand on the ship's console. Her eyes flickered with streams of data, and the XR-7's engines hummed with newfound efficiency. "I can guide us through," she said, her voice resonating with confidence. The ship weaved through the asteroid field with impossible grace, narrowly avoiding collisions that seemed inevitable. As they penetrated deeper into the cosmic obstacle course, a massive structure began to take shape before them. "By the stars," Dr. Vex breathed, her eyes widening in awe. "What is that?" Looming before them was an enormous space station, its design a mesmerizing blend of familiar and utterly alien architecture. Sleek metallic surfaces intertwined with organic-looking structures, creating a form that defied easy categorization. "It's dormant," Nova observed, her hybrid senses attuned to the station's energy emissions. "But not dead. It's sleeping." Daniel maneuvered the XR-7 closer, scanning for a safe docking point. "Can you interface with it, Nova? Find us a way in?" Nova nodded, closing her eyes in concentration. Her body tensed, and for a moment it seemed as if she were engaged in a silent struggle. Then, with a soft gasp, her eyes flew open. "I've done it," she announced. "The security systems have granted us access." The trio made their way to an airlock, their steps echoing in the eerie silence of the station's corridors. As they moved deeper into the complex, they encountered a series of abandoned laboratories. Stasis pods lined the walls, their contents barely visible through frosted glass. Dr. Vex approached one of the pods, wiping away a layer of condensation. She recoiled in shock. It's a hybrid," she exclaimed. "But not like you, Nova. This appears to be a combination of species I've never seen before." Nova moved from pod to pod, her eyes flickering with recognition. "There are human Aridian combinations here too," she said softly. "But they're incomplete, frozen in development." As they explored further, they came upon a vast chamber housing the station's central computer core. Nova approached it, drawn by an inexorable pull. As her fingers made contact with the interface, her body went rigid, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. "Nova!" Daniel cried out, reaching for her. Dr. Vex held him back. "Wait," she cautioned. "I think she's interfacing with the system." Nova's voice, when it came, seemed to emanate from the very walls of the station. "I see it all," she said, her words reverberating with power. "This place, it's called the Nexus, created by the progenitors, an ancient race that seeded life throughout the galaxy." As Nova spoke, holographic images flickered to life around them, showing the grand vision of a harmonious multi-species society. They sought to create compatible species that could intermingle, form a galactic community, Nova continued. But something went wrong. Ethical concerns arose. The project was abandoned. With a gasp, Nova's connection to the computer core severed. She stumbled backward, caught by Daniel's steadying hands. But as he held her, he noticed a change. Nova's body shimmered, her hybrid physiology seeming to stabilize before his eyes. "Nova," he breathed, "your body." She flexed her fingers, a look of wonder crossing her face. "I feel complete," she said. "I can control it now. The growth, the abilities, I understand them." Before they could fully process this development, alarms blared throughout the station. Dr. Vex rushed to a nearby console. "We've got company," she announced grimly. "Multiple ships approaching. It's the task force." Daniel's face paled. "How did they find us?" "It doesn't matter," Nova said, her voice filled with newfound commitment. "What matters is what we do next. This station, the Nexus, it holds the key to everything. The Aridian fertility crisis, advancements in human medicine, and so much more." As the trio debated their next move, the task force ships docked with the station. Ambassador Lyra, Major Hawkins, and Dr. Volkov led their teams into the Nexus, their faces a mix of awe and stubborn persistence. Nova stood tall, facing the approaching group. "Welcome to the Nexus," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We have much to discuss." The opposing factions stood frozen, the magnitude of their discovery sinking in. As tensions rose and competing agendas clashed, Nova realized that the fate of not just two species, but potentially the entire galaxy, now rested in her hands. The true test of her existence as a bridge between worlds was about to begin. Nova's declaration hung in the air, tension crackling between the opposing factions. Before anyone could respond, a deep rumble shook the station, causing everyone to stumble. "The Nexus is destabilizing," Dr. Vex announced, her silver fingers flying over a nearby console. "We have minutes, maybe an hour at most, before it collapses." Major Hawkins stepped forward, his face grim. "We need to evacuate immediately." "No," Nova interjected, her eyes glowing with grit. "There's too much knowledge here to lose. We need to salvage what we can." Ambassador Lyra nodded in agreement. "Nova's right. This station holds the key to solving both our species' problems. We can't let it be destroyed." Dr. Volkov, her earlier hostility replaced by scientific curiosity, spoke up. "We'll need to work together if we want to save anything of value." With the immediate threat overriding their previous conflicts, the group sprang into action. Nova placed her hands on the central computer core, her body shimmering as she interfaced directly with the station's systems. "I can accelerate the data transfer," she said, her voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "But I'll need help sorting through the information." Daniel and Dr. Vex positioned themselves at nearby terminals, their fingers flying across the keyboards as they worked to catalog and prioritize the incoming data. Meanwhile, Dr. Volkov led a team to secure physical samples and smaller pieces of technology. As they worked, Ambassador Lyra coordinated with the ships outside, ensuring they were ready for a rapid evacuation. Major Hawkins and his security team swept through the station, searching for any additional valuable assets or potential dangers. Another violent tremor shook the Nexus, causing lights to flicker and alarms to blare. "We're running out of time," Daniel shouted over the noise. Nova's eyes snapped open, blazing with intensity. "I've found something, a terraforming device. It could be the key to creating habitable worlds for future hybrid populations. Dr. Vex's antennae twitched with excitement. We need to secure it. Where is it located? Nova projected a holographic map of the station, highlighting a section not far from their current position. Daniel and Dr. Vex raced towards the location, while Nova continued to extract critical data from the core. As they entered the chamber housing the terraforming device, Daniel and Dr. Vex gasped in awe. The machine was a marvel of engineering, a fusion of organic and technological components that defied easy comprehension. We can't possibly move this entire thing, Daniel said, running his hands over the intricate controls. Dr. Vex nodded, her silver skin reflecting the pulsing lights of the device. We'll have to dismantle it, focus on the key components, and hope we can reassemble it later. They worked feverishly, carefully removing and packaging the most crucial parts of the machine. As they finished, Major Hawkins burst into the room. We've found something else, he announced, his voice tight with urgency. A hidden chamber. You need to see this. Leaving the packaged components with a security team, Daniel and Dr. Vex followed Major Hawkins to a previously concealed section of the station. Inside, they found rows of cryogenic containers, each holding what appeared to be DNA samples. Dr. Volkov was already there, her eyes wide with wonder. These are progenitor DNA samples, she breathed. The genetic material of the beings who created this station. This is unprecedented. Another violent shake of the station punctuated her words. Ambassador Lyra's voice crackled over the comms. We need to leave now. The Nexus is falling apart. As they rushed back to the central chamber, they found Nova still connected to the core, her body glowing with an intense light. Almost done, she gasped, her voice strained. The station groaned around them, sections of the ceiling beginning to collapse. Nova, we have to go, Daniel pleaded, reaching for her. With a final surge of effort, Nova extracted herself from the interface. As she did, the station's structural integrity failed catastrophically. Debris began to rain down around them, and the floor tilted ominously. Run! Major Hawkins shouted, leading the way towards the docking bay. As they sprinted through the collapsing corridors, Nova suddenly stopped, her eyes wide with concentration. She raised her hands, and a shimmering force field sprang into existence around them, deflecting falling debris. I can hold it together, she said, her voice tight with effort. But not for long. Get everyone out. Daniel hesitated, unwilling to leave her behind, but Dr. Vex pulled him along. She'll follow us, the Aridian scientist assured him. We need to make sure the path is clear. They raced through the station, Nova bringing up the rear, her force field expanding to protect the fleeing personnel and the precious cargo they carried. As they reached the docking bay, Nova's strength began to falter. Go, she shouted, her voice strained. I'll be right behind you. The last of the personnel boarded the ships as Nova stumbled into the docking bay. Daniel and Dr. Vex rushed to her side, supporting her as they made their way onto the waiting vessel. As soon as they were aboard, the ships detached from the dying station. Through the viewports, they watched as the Nexus imploded, collapsing in on itself in a spectacular display of light and energy. Nova, exhausted from her efforts, collapsed in Daniel's arms. As he lowered her gently to the floor, he noticed her skin beginning to shimmer and change. Dr. Vex, he called out, panic edging his voice. Something's happening to Nova. The Aridian scientist rushed over, her eyes widening as she observed Nova's rapidly changing physiology. She's entering some kind of metamorphic state, Dr. Vex announced, her voice a mix of concern and scientific fascination. As the rescued personnel watched in amazement, Nova's body began to encase itself in a cocoon-like structure, reminiscent of the stasis pods they had seen on the Nexus. The cocoon pulsed with a soft, otherworldly light. What's happening to her? Ambassador Lyra asked, her voice hushed. Dr. Vex shook her head, her antennae twitching with nervous energy. I'm not sure, but I think this might be the next stage of her evolution. As the ship sped away from the debris field that was once the Nexus, the occupants of the vessel gathered around Nova's cocoon, their faces a mix of worry, wonder, and hope. Whatever was happening to her, they all understood that it marked the beginning of a new chapter in their shared history. Daniel placed a hand on the smooth surface of the cocoon, feeling a faint warmth emanating from within. "Hang in there, Nova," he whispered. "We're here for you." Dr. Vex placed a comforting hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We'll figure this out," she assured him. "Together." As the fleet set a course for the nearest safe harbor, the teams began the monumental task of analyzing the data and technology they had salvaged from the Nexus. But all eyes kept returning to the gently pulsing cocoon, wondering what new marvels or challenges would emerge when Nova awakened. Awakened from her metamorphosis, the cocoon pulsed with increasing intensity, the soft light growing brighter until it forced the onlookers to shield their eyes. With a sudden burst, the structure dissolved into shimmering particles, revealing Nova's transformed form. She stood before them, her body radiating an ethereal glow that seemed to emanate from within. Her features were a perfect blend of human and Aridian, her skin iridescent, and her eyes pools of swirling starlight. But what truly stunned the assembled group was not just Nova's transformation, but the 7 small forms that materialized around her. Hybrid infants, each unique in their appearance, floated gently to the ground. Their tiny bodies displayed varying combinations of human and Aridian traits, some with silvery skin, others with delicate antennae, and all with eyes that held an impossible depth of awareness for newborns. Daniel and Dr. Vex moved forward as if in a trance, their eyes wide with wonder and emotion. They reached Nova just as her feet touched the ground, enveloping her in a tight embrace. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he held his surrogate daughter, while Dr. Vex's antennae quivered with hardly restrained joy. "Nova," Daniel whispered, his voice choked with emotion. You're incredible." Dr. Vex reached out to touch one of the hybrid infants, her silver fingers gently caressing its cheek. The baby turned its head, focusing its gaze on her with startling clarity. "They're fully formed," she said in awe, "and responsive. This is unprecedented." Ambassador Lyra approached cautiously, her initial wariness giving way to fascination as she observed the peaceful scene. "Nova," she said, her voice filled with a mix of respect and uncertainty, "what exactly has happened here?" Nova turned to address the group, her voice resonating with a harmonious blend of human and Aridian tones. "During my transformation, I gained access to the collective knowledge of the progenitors," she explained. "Their most advanced genetic engineering techniques, their understanding of life itself. It's all here." She tapped her temple gently. "And with that knowledge, I was able to bring forth these children, the first of a new generation of hybrids." Major Hawkins, who had been standing tensely with his hand near his weapon, visibly relaxed. He signaled his team to stand down, recognizing that there was no threat in this miraculous event. Dr. Volkov could no longer contain herself. She approached with a handheld scanner, her eyes gleaming with scientific curiosity. "May I?" she asked, gesturing towards the infants. At Nova's nod, she began taking readings, her excitement growing with each scan. "Their genetic structures are stable," she announced. "Perfect integration of human and Aridian DNA. This is beyond anything we could have imagined." As the group marveled at the hybrid children, Nova's expression became serious. "What we've witnessed here today is only the beginning," she said. "I have a vision, a plan for our future, one where humans, Aridians, and hybrids can coexist and flourish together." She waved her hand and a holographic display appeared in the air before them, showing a lush, Earth-like planet. "I propose we establish a series of colony worlds, starting with this one, a place where we can build a new society, free from the prejudices and limitations of our past." Ambassador Lyra studied the image, her diplomatic mind already racing with possibilities. "This is a bold proposal, Nova, but after what we've seen here today, I believe it's one worth pursuing." Major Hawkins nodded in agreement. "If we can achieve this level of cooperation and integration, it could change everything. I'm willing to support this initiative." Over the next few hours, as the ships continued their journey to the nearest safe harbor, plans were set in motion. The planet Nova had shown them, a habitable world in a neutral star system, was quickly dubbed Harmony, a fitting name for the first true human Aridian hybrid colony. In the following months, preparation for the Harmony colony proceeded at a breakneck pace. Nova worked tirelessly with the terraforming technology salvaged from the Nexus, fine-tuning the planet's environment to be optimal for all three species. Her ability to interface directly with the progenitor technology proved invaluable, allowing for adjustments and improvements that would have taken years to achieve through conventional means. Daniel and Dr. Vex threw themselves into the work of preparing for the colony's unique needs. They led a team of scientists in developing specialized medical facilities that could cater to human, Aridian, and hybrid physiologies. They also began crafting educational programs for the hybrid children, whose growth continued to astound everyone. By the time the colony ships were ready to depart, Nova's offspring had reached the equivalent of human toddlers, displaying remarkable cognitive abilities and a natural affinity for both human and Aridian languages. As the day of departure approached, Nova made a groundbreaking announcement. Using her unique physiology and the progenitor DNA samples recovered from the Nexus, she had developed a gene therapy that could enhance fertility in both humans and Aridians. This discovery promised to solve the Aridian population crisis without requiring full hybridization, alleviating one of the major sources of tension between the two species. The launch day for the Harmony colony ships arrived, filled with a palpable sense of excitement and hope. Volunteers from both Earth and Aridia boarded the vessels, their faces alight with the promise of a new beginning. As the ships lifted off, Nova stood with Daniel and Dr. Vex, watching the streams of light that marked humanity's next great adventure. "This is just the first step," Nova said, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "There's so much more for us to explore, to discover, to become." Daniel squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of pride for the remarkable being his once-secret experiment had become. Dr. Vex's antennae quivered with emotion as she gazed at the hybrid children, now securely ensconced in their own specialized transport pod. As the colony ships engaged their faster-than-light drives, disappearing into the vast expanse of space, the occupants of the lead vessel gathered around view screens to watch their approach to their new home. Harmony grew larger in their vision, a blue-green jewel suspended in the void, promising a future of unity and endless possibility.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.